Hi, welcome everybody. Lovely to see so many familiar faces. Actually, you've written names with a little icon with initials in it on our list, but lovely to see so many familiar friends that have come to support us on our lightning talks again. I'm Sharon Constanson, Chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce here in the UK. And today I'm actually only here to say hello and not even goodbye necessarily, because I'm going to hand over to the very, very competent Dawn. So I'm not going to take her thunder away at the moment, but just to welcome you to our fourth lightning talks. We started off with, I think it was 4 or 5 people, but we've realized how valuable people's contribution is that we now have got it down to 3. And that gives us a lot more ability to share quality content with the individual participants and makes it a more engaged experience for our panelists as well. So thanks to all the panelists that are joining us, of which I know all of them. So it's really nice to see you here and looking forward to your life stories, because a few of them in the past have had big lumps in my throat and they've been quite emotional and touching listening to people's life stories. So without further ado, and please just one thing, guys, because I'm not going to be saying the goodbye, watch the website. We've got some amazing events coming up in the next 4 or 5 weeks. There's 1 or 2 new ones that are potentially still going to come on. So please look out for them, particularly Life is Wonderful on the 18th of November. So please will you look out for that one and book, because we have got limited numbers. Lots of other things happening in the chamber, but right now what is happening is Lightning Talks by Dawn. Hand over to you, Dawn.
Thank you. I was born on a banana farm in White River, and we had regular power failures. So the first thing my late mother taught me as a toddler was to blow out a candle. And when we moved to the Highveld, we had power failures for another reason completely: storms. Those remarkable Highveld storms were petrifying for a little girl. But my mom told me that the thunder and lightning were the clouds bumping their heads and the rain was their tears. So I started to feel sorry for the clouds during a storm, and I grew up to love them and be inspired by them. So welcome to our storm this evening, our lightning talks. I know you too will fall in love with our speakers and be inspired by them. So our first speaker this evening is Hazel Hoole. And Hazel is joining us from Joburg this evening, where the jacarandas are out. I am so jealous, Hazel.
They're stunning.
Oh, I don't even want to know. Don't you dare tell me. Hazel is the founder of the VA Centre Virtual Assistants and Sheepskin Slippers South Africa. She collected her colourful career whilst living in the US and the UK and is now in Joburg. Hazel will be sharing about coming to terms with her Smartie Box career driven by changing interests. Now, I have a little toy with me this evening, and it's my favorite new toy. So it's 5 minutes, and it's just to give the speakers an idea of how long they still have to go for their talk. So over to you, Hazel.
Don't distract me with that, Dawn. Put it away.
I'll hold it here like my little pet. Oh.
It's very off-putting. 20-odd years ago, I was in the UK looking for a job. I'd handed my CV into as many recruitment agencies as I could, and I was full of hope and positivity. But each time I did so, I watched as the recruitment agent's eyes just widened and then just glazed over. You see, my CV is a bit like a box of Smarties. It's full of colourful roles, projects and opportunities that I've taken during my career. To date, I've worked as an executive assistant, an office manager, a travel manager, a radio presenter, a band manager. I've been an agent for a couple of A-listers, a rhino conservationist, and I've settled swaps, done transaction management and investor relations in banking. And so the list continues. I took what I learned from each of these roles, put them in my Smartie box, and moved on. But despite my colourful skill set and experience, recruitment agents really struggled to connect me with traditional roles. In a way, I had gathered so many varied skills that I was unemployable unless I was temping. And at the time, rather than work with the recruiters to help them appreciate the benefit of having someone like me to place, I focused on the outcome, and was left with an overwhelming belief that I was not good enough. It caused me anxiety and feelings of inferiority and despair that I would never have a traditionally successful career. But why is a varied skill set such a bad thing? I mean, like, really? And how can those of us who dare to explore help those who are hiring to recognize that we can bring that little bit of extra something that perhaps others don't have? In fact, there are companies that specifically look at that square peg for a round hole. Google is a prime example. Apparently, when Google are hiring, they look for candidates who excel in 4 different categories: general cognitive ability, leadership, role-related knowledge, and googliness. So googliness is basically a word for company culture fit and integration. So the head of staffing at Google has been quoted as saying, if you think about how quickly Google changes, we need to be assured the person who's been hired for one role is going to find something else to do at Google. And that comes back to hiring smart generalists. And for me, I totally love this approach. This need to be agile as the business models evolve is possibly more paramount today than ever. For many of those businesses who are fortunate enough to still be delivering their services in today's climate, there's been a major need to adapt and evolve quickly to meet the restrictions and expectations caused by this global pandemic. In turn, they've needed their teams to be equally able to adapt with speed. So no doubt it is those square pegs with colorful Smartie CVs that have been able to adapt the quickest. What I really hope is that more and more businesses seek out people that they can bring, not just seek out people for what they can bring, not just that they tick the boxes of a job description. Somehow I've managed to use all of my skills and lessons that I picked up along my very higgledy-piggledy way. I founded a few companies, including expanding an NGO project from South Africa into the UK, without ever having really studied for any specific roles. All of these roles have taught me lessons, some positive, some negative. It's literally taken me the better part of my life to be okay with the fact that as my interests change, so does my career and passion path. What this has taught me is that it doesn't matter what has happened along the way. It's what you learn and take from these experiences and how you apply them that counts. So, to those who want to explore rather than focus, follow your curiosity, be authentic. See things from a multitude of different angles. Step out of your comfort zone. Say yes. Be interested and be interesting. Embrace your higgledy-piggledy career and enjoy your box of Smarties.
Oh, fantastic. I'm so keen for a box of Smarties. I should have got some. And you've got time to spare. Look at that.
Email them to you.
You've just finished. Well done. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Hazel. So up next, we've got Roger, because we've got to put, the gentleman between the two ladies. Roger is a retired journalist and currently the chairman of the Felixstowe Chamber of Trade and Commerce. He was born and grew up in Uitenhage and finished school in Durban. Roger has worked for a number of newspapers, starting with a friend in Bloemfontein. He also worked on Farmers Weekly and the Rhodesian Herald in Salisbury, as it was known then, and the Pretoria News before he was seconded to the London office in 1980. And in the UK, he's worked on newspapers and agricultural magazines in Portsmouth, London, and Ipswich before going freelance in 2000. Now, Roger's talk this evening is about coincidences. How coincidences changed my life, or was it just pot luck?
Well, thank you. My adventure with coincidences, or as my brother used to call them, tiny miracles, started in a wrecked car in the middle of the night in Ferial Pass on the way down to Durban. And I only heard about this afterwards, but the police discovered these 2 unconscious bodies covered in blood in this little car. No identification, didn't know what was going on, who it was, or anything like that. But fortunately, they were going through the car and they found a couple of books of court certificates, which we used to have to use when we covered court in the old days in South Africa. And I was a very untidy, lackluster sort of person. I just chucked them into the, when I finished with them, chucked them into the cubby hole of the car. And the cops found this, and it said the Friend newspapers. And there was a telephone number. So the cops said, let's phone the newspaper. This is 1 o'clock in the morning. Fortunately, that was a Thursday night, and it happened to be in a general election night. And the newspaper was bringing out a special edition the next morning. And the editor and the manager of the newspaper were in the office when the phone went. Yes. Do they know anybody who's got a red car, little red VW, who might have come from Bloemfontein on the way to Durban? Oh, yeah, Roger Abbott. Yes, he's got parents in Durban. Yeah, maybe it was him. The manager happened to know my brother at the same time. He phoned my brother and he said, look, and my brother confirmed. So they phoned my parents, got my parents' number, phoned my parents. And yes, my parents drove up to Harrismith, where I was in the hospital, and said, oh, yeah, this is Roger. About 4 months later, I found this out. Well, I was in hospital unconscious for about 3 months, I think, then came out and eventually went back to the newspaper about 6 months later. And the manager had done everything for my parents. He'd organized all the medical aid. He'd really gone around and I think I paid about 400 Rand, or my dad paid about 400 Rand for the whole expedition, which was transfer me down to Durban with neurosurgeons, etc., etc. And the managers just organized things that it all went onto a specialist fund, and I got paid for it. And they invested so much in me. And the editor, when I got back to the office, said, well, Roger, you're not good enough. You're still not so all that good. You can't go out reporting now. I'm going to put you in the subs office, where I could sit down and just read new stories, write headlines and all the rest of it. Invested in me, in other words, because that's where I learned about newspapers. I learned how to shape stories. I learned how to write headlines. I knew how to do page design. I learned how to do page design. I learned more about media studies. And now I reflect that was that coincidence, that this all happened. And there I was, just fortunately, because the police found this, and it happened to be election night, and the mayor and everybody was in. Roll on a little bit, and I ended up in Pretoria as a reporter, and I was commissioned to interview Desmond Tutu when he came to see P.W. Botha and P.W. Botha as Prime Minister. And I went to interview him just as a reporter. Oh, hello, Archbishop. He was still a bishop then. Hello, Bishop Tutu. Yes, and he told us all about his meeting with P.W. Botha and what he'd said and all the apartheid business and that. And he said, Roger Abbott, are you related to Mary Abbott? So I said, yeah, that's my mother. I work with her in the South African Council of Churches. How is she? Fine, fair enough. Now, I go on another 6-7 months, and I'm in the London office. And my first major interview in the London office that I'm asked to do is Bishop Tutu coming to London to see Archbishop Runcie at Lambeth Palace. Brilliant. So I go along to Lambeth Palace. And he remembers me. Roger, how are you? Get a little interview. And I get to know one of the press officers of the Archbishop Runcie, who happened to have family in South Africa and liked my accent, recognized the accent, and said, gosh, you from South Africa? And we had a little chat about it. And I gave her that she knew where I came from which the London office. And the next morning she phoned me and she said, Roger, by the way, I just thought I'd let you know, the Archbishop has just arranged for an interview for Tutu, Desmond Tutu, to go and see the Pope at the Vatican. So I said, that's fantastic, good. I rushed over to the news editor and said, Tutu's going to see the Pope. A nice story, brilliant. And he said, when? I said, I forgot to ask that. Went back, phoned this lady, and she said, tonight, he's catching the plane tonight. I went and told the news editor. I was on that plane that evening, on my way to Rome I interviewed Desmond on the plane. He was pleased to see me on the plane. We had a little chat, and I got an exclusive interview. Now, reflecting on all these things and other things that happened to me during my career as a journalist, I went freelance eventually. And after working on a farming newspaper in London, I had met quite a few people then, and I was freelancing on various different agricultural papers and that. And one day I had nothing to do, as freelancers often don't have anything to do. And I was just thinking, a colleague I knew remembered on Farming News with me, Cedric. I thought, I wonder what he's doing these days. I'll give him a call. And you often think of people, I wonder if so-and-so, and you don't do anything. I thought, no, I've got nothing to do. I'll phone Sid. He just happened to have been appointed editor of an international magazine in Amsterdam, no, in Holland. He wasn't in Amsterdam then, he was in another little village. And he said, oh, Roger, how are you? Funny, I was thinking we're just looking for a freelance journalist to do a supplement for us. A big supplement. Would you like to do it? Love to. So, and I did it the next year as well. That was 6 months' work I got out of one phone call. And in fact, I got a lot more because the same company in Holland also published magazines for pig farming, vegetables and fruit and flowers. Those 3 different magazines. I got a trip to Ecuador, a 4-day trip to Ecuador to cover fruit and vegetables. I paid for a trip to South Africa to write stories about flowers, roses, which were growing in South Africa, and pig farming in KwaZulu-Natal, which is fortunate because my family is in KwaZulu-Natal. So I stayed there at the expense of this pig farming, pig progress in Holland, thanks to a coincidence that I had picked up. And I reflect now that I'm sort of semi-retired, and if you think about it, so many coincidences in your life, or is it just luck? But it all through your life, you see this happens, and then, oh, of course, because I met that. If I hadn't have met that person on that day or been there on that day, I wouldn't have met that person and done this and that, and I'll be nowhere today. And I just think people need to take more recognition of these coincidences. And if you think of something, don't say, well, I won't bother now. Do it. It's amazing what sort of results you get if you just do it. Think of it, do it, don't put it off. That's
fantastic. You know what? It's our accents. Everyone picks them up from miles away, don't they? They hear us and they go, oh. And then when I go back to South Africa, everyone says, oh, you sound so British. But how do people here recognize my South African accent if I sound British?
Dawn, I've been here 40 years now. I thought I spoke posh.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Yeah, coincidences, and just open yourself up to them. I think that's the big message. Thank you so much. That's absolutely something to think about for sure. Finally, we have Ferial Puren, who's joining us from Scotland. Ferial is the founder and managing director of Ignite Life. Her Imagineering has led her to Ignite Life's current focus, which is innovating behavioral change tools for change makers and influencers. Ferial supports emerging social change makers to successfully and profitably bring their idea, product, service, or technology to market with a focus on sustainability. Now, Ferial has found inspiration in dance. So from her first dance class on the Cape Flats to her fulfilling career today, Ferial will be sharing what dance taught me about life and freedom.
Hi there. So when I was 10 years old, that was in 1983, my lone parent mom scraped together her last little bit of money to pay for that first ballet lesson at the Eon Group in Athlone in the Cape Flats. Now, what she didn't know back then was that her money and the sacrifice that she made for me didn't merely purchase for me that dance lesson, but it purchased also for me a means to begin to process and understand freedom with new eyes. Now, this was important because, especially given the fact that I was born in 1973 in apartheid South Africa with the wrong skin color. So this new perspective about freedom would go on to shape the entire trajectory of my life. And more importantly, it would help me discover my unique expression. And that which I now spend my life realizing. And it's incredible that dance helped me to understand that life and love and freedom and happiness and all these wonderful things that we all want in this life had very, very, very little to do with my circumstances. So at age 12, I remember trying to help my mom find a new home for us because we needed to move. Now, I was really excited to help out with this, endeavor. And I was paging through the newspapers and looking for places. And of course, I found quite a few places that was exactly what we needed because I'd made sure I knew what we needed and it was within our price range. But when I showed them to my mom, she kind of carefully explained that we couldn't live there. Now, my 12-year-old brain could not compute all of this information because it was like, what's the problem here? We can afford that. It's what we need. So why can't we live there? She went on then to explain to me that unfortunately only white people were allowed to live there. And just like that bubble that I grew up in, where I thought the world was a conducive place for me, was burst. And for the first time in my young life, I realized that the world around me was not a fair world, and that the world around me was never going to accept, or I was going to be at a great disadvantage because of the color of my skin. So I spent the next few years of my life understanding just how unfair that world that I was born into really was. I was reminded every day by every bus, train, bench, park, and beach that my world was reserved for whites only. But after that first ballet lesson at the Eon Group in Athlone, dance went on to become a very fun, vibrant, even vital part of my life, and albeit intermittent because there was like lots of breaks in between. But it did kind of, for the next 3 decades, I was doing some kind of dance. It started out with ballet and then moved on to contemporary African dance. And then after about a 10-year break, 8 years ago, because during that 10 years, I was raising a family, having children. And 8 years ago, I started to learn the Latin dances. I started to learn salsa, bachata, kizomba. And I never went on to become a professional dancer. But it was one of my greatest teachers. And that's why I'm talking about it today. Because to be a good dancer, I started realizing you needed to put in the practice to learn fundamentals first. And it's just like everything else in life. And once you have those down, you need to have a few other ingredients, and that is you need to be a team player. You need to be innovative and creative. And finally, you need to have the resilience that lets you turn every mistake on the dance floor into a new, creative, innovative, beautiful move. So dance allowed me to see if I wanted to have this happy, fulfilling, and rewarding life, despite all of those prejudices of my external world, I would need to go on this internal evolutionary journey to build what I call resilience. And that resilience would help me face the tough stuff. You know, the things in this life we go through that sometimes we don't expect because that's what life's like. We've just gone through COVID-19 and it's exactly what happened to all of us. You know, so that these things that are tough, they become my lessons rather than my curses. They become my challenges rather than my oppressors, and my teachers rather than my tormentors. And it was this same dance that birthed within me the desire to see my same landscapes, but with new eyes. And it is that desire that led me to become a personal development coach 16 years ago. And through becoming a coach, I discovered my own unique sacred expression, like I like to call it. It plays out through all of the hats that I wear in the external world. I facilitate the South African Chamber of Commerce in Scotland, and I work for an organization called Institute of Future Living here in Scotland, and many different hats that I wear here. And through one of these hats is Ignite Life, the organization that I founded. And I founded Ignite Life because it seeks to find more people who learned what I did from dance. And that is that a life of love, freedom, and happiness had little to do with circumstances. And it had everything to do with embarking on your own internal evolutionary journey. Because when you do that, I think you find within yourself solutions. Solutions that will change the world around you. Because I've seen that. I've seen people that I've worked with. I've seen when they find the thing that makes them come alive, it is a solution that they bring to the world. And the idea with finding these solutions is so that we can no longer have a world that has all these prejudices, but we find that those solutions create for us a world where there is unity amidst our diversity, and that all life on our planet is valued. So my encouragement for you today from my story is, it doesn't matter how hard, it doesn't matter what your tormentors are, it doesn't matter what your challenges are. When you decide to go on that own internal journey, they are going to be your teachers. They are going to be the things that push you and propel you into finding your own unique sacred expression. And my heart is that you choose to do that, because when you do that, you're going to help me create the world that I want to live in and that I think you want to live in.
Oh, Ferial, that's absolutely lovely. Thank you so much. That's really lovely. And thank you for sharing your story. It's the stories that make things real. And absolutely, I love that. I love the idea of taking the analogy of dance and bringing it into life, because it has such a lovely parallel. So we have a question that's come through, and this one is for Hazel. So Hazel, of all the higgledy-piggledy roles you have played, which role taught you the most? And secondly, was it the role you loved the most?
Oh, thank you. I think each role that I've done has taught me something. Each company that I've set up that has taught me something. Some have failed, some have won, but I think the most, which one has taught me the most is probably the music management company called Living It Live. I set it up in London, and it was a platform for South African musicians to come and play in London. And at the time, there wasn't anybody doing it. So I filled a nice little gap in the market there. But it was my first company that I'd set up. So, you have to go through that whole registration process of setting up a company, which I'd never done before. And I went in blindly. I had no clue how to do it. I had a gap in the market, and I had a lot of passion and grit, and I just pushed through. And I learned a lot. You work with amazing people, creative people, everybody from A-listers who've been on the stage for many, many years, like Johnny Clegg and Barry Hilton and all of those guys, all the way down to the breakthrough acts who are probably getting 5, 20 people on a stage. And there are many roles that you need to play, like marketing, advertising, event management,
ego management.
Pardon?
Ego management.
Ego management. There's that too. But there's a choice in that. You can choose who you work with. And if there are people that you can see that there's going to have to be ego management. And I think that was one of my choices. I chose not to work with those. I was very fortunate that I had amazing people that I worked with. And I could only work as hard as they would work. Yeah. It wasn't for me to get them over the line. It was for them to get themselves over the line. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that role. So I guess that was the one I loved the most as well.
Brilliant. Roger, I wanted to know, is Desmond Tutu exactly the way we see him? Is he the same in person, or is he different?
He's fantastic. He's just an incredible man. And I was when I was in Pretoria and interviewed him, I was actually at the Pretoria Press Club, and he came to talk to us immediately after he'd seen P.W. Botha the first time to discuss, P.W. Botha as Prime Minister, to discuss dismantling of apartheid. Well, we hoped dismantling of apartheid. It took much longer, but this was in the late 70s, 79, I think. And he came and he just sat with us in the press, in our little club room, and gave us this chat off the cuff, absolutely brilliantly. And the tradition in those days was that the chairman of the press club took these people out for dinner afterwards. Maybe they had them once a month, got a newsmaker to come along and talk to us, and then the chairman would take the person to dinner afterwards. And I said to Desmond after, I said, you know, this is the tradition, Bishop. Would you come and have dinner with me in the hotel? It was a 4-star hotel in Pretoria. And in those days, this 4-star hotel had special permission, and people of color could enjoy a meal there, but that was it with white people. So I said, don't worry, I've got all the permission. I knew the manager, it was all sorted. So he said, well, Roger, I would love to, but I can't really. So I said, please, Bishop, I just like to get to know you a bit better. We talk about my mother and this sort of thing. So he said, well, I'll tell you why, Roger. My wife, Leah, she didn't want to come into the hotel because she's not white. So she's been sitting in the car waiting for me. She was outside sitting in the car waiting. So I went to the manager. I said, look, he said, no problem, Roger. So, and I spent an evening chatting to them over dinner at the hotel, and then seeing him again in London, and again on the plane to Vatican.
Your mates?
Well, no, not. He was so friendly, so nice. And when I first in London, one of my big jobs was he was preaching at Westminster Abbey, you know, doing the whole Sunday service. But it happened to be the day clocks went back. And I was from South Africa. I had forgotten all about this. I didn't know about it. So I arrived at the church an hour late after he delivered his sermon and all the rest of it. I thought, what am I going to do now? Fortunately, there were still people leaving the church. And I went round to the back to the vestry, and I said, is Bishop Tutu anywhere around? Oh, yes, he's just disrobing in the vestry. So I said, fine. Went in. He said, yes, hello, Roger. And I explained, and he had a laugh. And because he always tells jokes against himself, and he laughed and all this. And he said, no problem, Roger. Look, I've got a copy of it here. Would you like it? And I got a copy of his sermon, so I could go back. But he told this funny story about himself, that he was on the plane when black people were first allowed to fly, SAA, first class, and he was sitting there, and this little girl came up to him and said, oh, Sir Reverend, can I please have your autograph? It's lovely. I really want your autograph. And he said, this is nice. This is the first time. And he got out his pen and flourishing, what's your name? He wrote a flourishing autograph, a little message to the girl. And she said, oh, thank you, Bishop Muzorewa, because she thought he was Bishop Muzorewa, who was Prime Minister of Rhodesia at that time.
Rhodesia, yeah.
Zimbabwe. And he laughed. He's got this chuckle like the Dalai Lama's chuckle. They just laugh all the time. They are brilliant.
Fantastic. You're very lucky. We're very fantastic privilege.
Journalists are very lucky. Very, very lucky.
Well, you make your luck, I think. Also, you do make your luck. And here's a question. Here's a view for you, Ferial. So well done for sharing the world with the world and sharing the world as it should be. How do you navigate life when faced with people you work with who may not share your worldview?
I think you have patience. There's a reason for that, because I recognize for myself that I haven't always been who I am today, which meant that there was journey. And so if someone else could have patience with me, then I think that's what I need to have for others. It's a very difficult thing to kind of get your head around, I think, because, yeah, there are moments that you do have to, like if you're perpetrators, you've got to hold them responsible, right? So you got to ask them to explain why. But the thing that I also began to realize is that for every person, for these three white people sitting across from me, they've had what I call inertia, which is there has been experience in their life that has brought them to this place right now. So for me to just take everything on face value is not a good thing. The same way in which I have had inertia. So I think for me, it's really going to that place of realizing every human being on this planet. There has been even someone like Hitler, there is this journey that brings people to where they are at, and it is when we can get our head around that, we can have this empathy. And even then, the worst people on the planet, you can understand that there must have been a reason that they are the way they are. And as I said, even though we would ask them to make restoration, we would hold them accountable for their actions, but we would also show up with what I call grace and empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you a Strictly Come Dancing fan?
Yep, I love it, but
Fantastic.
I don't get to watch it. I'm a Strictly Come Dancing person, man. I used to dance like 4 nights a week. I loved every minute of it. It was just this freedom.
Absolutely.
So, lockdown has been a great bummer.
So thank you, Sylvia. She's sent in a message, and it's hi all. This is so encouraging, and thank you so much for sharing your stories. I'm currently working as a nurse, and you've given me the bold spirit to hold on to my home care business ideas, which are waiting to be registered. I've gone through all the stages following key areas of regulation, and 2021 will be coming back with positive feedback and testimony. And I think that's something that's brilliant. That is so encouraging. I've got goosebumps thinking about what you can achieve with all your brilliant ideas. I'm sure you'll make them work for you. And I'm so pleased that these speakers have given you that bold spirit to hold on to those ideas. Would anybody else like to give Sylvia some advice?
Go with your instincts.
Sylvia, go, Roger.
I was going to say, go with your instincts. If you think you want to do it and you suddenly think, do it.
Sylvia, I say, well done for being bold and stepping out of your comfort zone. Every day is a school day. Every day I learn something new, whether it's about myself or about somebody else or about business. And like you say, you're just registering your company. You probably got a long journey ahead of you. Not every day will be easy, but the easy days, just dust yourself up and get back up the next day. And hang on to that boldness and push forward on it. Have a bit of grit. That's what entrepreneurism needs and will require. But go for it. You've got this, girl.
My advice would be that you should look at why you're doing what you're doing as well. And you should make sure that you're not just doing it because it's a great idea, but you're doing it because it's coming out of who you are. Because countless times I've seen people go and do stuff and it falls to the floor because, as Hazel has just said, you lack that grit. And the grit comes when you're really believing in what you're doing. And it's out of who you are, not just an idea. So for me, it's been a long road developing what I have. And a lot of people thinking I was crazy doing what I'm doing, right? But I kept going because it is who I am. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you. Roger, how did you end up being bloodied in a car?
Oh, my car, it was late at night and my car and a horse collided on Brennan's Pass. And the horse fell on top of us, sort of thing, and all the rest of it. And that left us in rather bad shape.
Oh,
so,
what an awful accident. The other question is for you as well, is, Roger, was it scary being a journalist in the 80s in South Africa?
Well, actually, for me, I was in there in the 70s, late 70s. And yes, because especially if you worked with English newspapers, which I did, because they were seen as the anti-apartheid, anti-government newspapers, Cape Argus, the Star, Pretoria News, etc. And every newsroom had a spy. We knew that. Often we knew who the spy was, but you didn't know what he was reporting or she was reporting. And I did know my phone was tapped, and I knew I was being followed. And this was denied. And then in those days, I was a military correspondent for about 9 months. And every story you got, it was during the war, Angola, etc. Every story you got, you had to phone through the 24-hour press office, army press office, and clear it with them. And they usually say, oh, no, sorry, you can't publish any of that. And you'd sort of plead with them and say, listen, please, you know, everybody has heard the aircraft, they heard about it, they've got children there. And they'd say, okay, well, you can just use the first paragraph or the first 2 lines. Do you know what really happened? Once you got to know them, they said, do you know what really happened, Roger? Said, and then you give the horrible, the background of the story, which was awful. And the worst, I'd applied for this transfer to Pretoria News about a week earlier, or a month earlier, and I'd heard nothing. And one night I was finding a story through to get it cleared at about midnight. And this colonel I'd got to know on the phone, who always answered the phone, and he explained to me that I couldn't use it, etc., but I could use that one line. And he said, oh, and by the way, Roger, congratulations, you're going to Pretoria. I said, hey? He said, oh, didn't you? Yeah, I thought you're going to go be Pretoria. The next morning, I went in, the next morning, I went to the editor and I said, look, Paul, what's the story? Have you heard anything about this thing? He said, Roger, it's just come through on the telex. I've just got this through. Yes, they'd like you to go. Editors accepted your transfer.
And he knew the night before?
He knew the night before. Then I got scared.
Sure. Oh, well, you should write a book, Roger. We need your book. Come on. You're a writer. Write a book. There's a book in everyone. Yeah. Well, guys, I just think for us to finish off is, I think we've got, let's just see here. So Reva says, I was born in the 80s in South Africa, and I want to know if there was a huge invisible division amongst white people and the English white people and the Afrikaans white people. Roger, can you answer that one?
I wouldn't say it depended. It was huge in certain respects, but there were a lot of my best friend, in fact, is Afrikaans. He's still a best friend. Lives in Pietermaritzburg now. And yeah, there's some great Afrikaans people, some great English people. There's some horrible English people, very right wing. Well, as far in my view, I didn't like them. The Afrikaans people I didn't like. Everybody can be likable. It's up to you. You just. Yeah. I don't think there was a great divide as such. There's certainly a divide between the old Nationalist Party and the opposition parties, like the Liberals and that. And yes, there was a huge divide between them because they just didn't understand each other. Mm. But what really used to strike me on the political side was I interviewed a number of Afrikaans cabinet ministers, Nationalist Party cabinet ministers, and some of them, 1 or 2 of them, they believed what they were saying. They didn't do it out of hatred or anything like that. They actually believed it. As horrifying as it might be, they believed it. Mm-hmm. And they did what they did because they thought that was really the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that was scary. But,
sure.
You know.
Thank you. So just to end off, I think if there's one line that you'd like to leave people that relates to your life and your story and your business, what would it be? Should we start with Ferial?
Okay, I would say that when you tug at anything, it is connected to something else.
Fantastic. Oh, that's powerful stuff. I love that. Hazel.
Don't be scared to step out your comfort zone and do something you've never done without any formal education around it. You can learn on the job. It might be a little bit daunting and you might take you a bit longer, but it's possible.
Fantastic. Thank you. Roger.
Be positive and call those people you think about. When you suddenly think about them, don't put it off. Phone them and even if they don't give you anything or anything, say, oh, hello, how are you? Even if they're not there. It's just the message, just the fact that you're thinking about them. And often they're thinking about you at the same time. It's amazing how often that happens. but be positive.
Fantastic.
Another
Thank you.
coincidence, Roger.
There we go. Yeah. Make your coincidences, create them.
Or luck or tiny miracles.
Tiny miracles. I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to our speakers, Hazel from the Joburg Jacaranda City, I'd call it now, because it's, you know, you're in Joburg, and for Roger up in Felixstowe, and for Ferial up in Scotland, and me down in Somerset, and Sharon nowhere near any of us. Sharon, did you want to say something before we finished off, or is...
No, I don't need to. I was just there to say goodbye. And really, thanks, ladies and Roger. It was inspiring as always. Big lump in my throat when I listened to it. And having grown up in apartheid South Africa as well, and the things that we considered normal because we knew no different until you tried to work it out. And we will always look at life differently to those who grew up post 94, where they don't understand what we're talking about, and they never will. And that's what our history has to live with. And we've got to work through those differences and things that were normal to us. And it wasn't our fault, but it's amazing how it has impacted us all so much in our lives.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. And yeah, everybody have a lovely evening. And wherever you're joining us from, thank you very much for joining us. And we hope to see you at the next Lightning Talks. And enjoy the storm for us, Hazel.
I will.
Thank
As it
you.
cracks. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Quick thanks to Dawn for hosting it.
No
Yes, thank
problem
you,
at all.
and
Thanks,
Sharon.
Sharon, for having us.
No problem. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night.